In this episode of Detroit Performs, a figurative artist, a printmaker, and making mandalas out of sweet treats. It's all ahead on this edition of Detroit Performs.
Funding for Detroit Performs is provided by the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs and the National Endowment for the Arts, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Detroit Performs. I'm your host, DJ Oliver, and I'm at the Detroit Artist Market, also known as the Dam, which was founded all the way back in 1932 in the midst of the Great Depression. Now, during this period, a group of local art patrons realized there was a void of locations where artists could exhibit and sell their work, so they created the Dam. Today, the Dam is committed to contemporary art and connecting artists, collectors, and communities. Now, let's get to our first artist. Detroiter Tylonn Sawyer is a figurative artist whose symbolic paintings will definitely get you thinking. Here's more from Tylonn.
Art can inspire people, and a lot of people don't think about how strong that can be to inspire someone. One of the, biggest compliments to me is if like a young black person sees my paintings and they talk about how they responded to it, and they start talking about what they thought about the painting, and some of the things they're saying are some of the things that I was thinking of. Like, that moves me to no end. I really just fell in love with the figure, like the human body, the form, and it's really challenging. I'm a people person. I love faces, I love people, I love looking at bodies, I love drawing them, interpreting them. In terms of the social justice aspect of it, or really like focusing on race and identity, I would just say, sort of like in graduate school, learning a lot about Western art, I saw no images of people who look like me in there, and I was learning how to paint, but no one ever told me how to paint myself, how to paint my mother or anyone like that. And I remember asking a teacher of mine once, like, hey, are we gonna have any black models? And he told me a very sad truth, and it was a truth. He was like, unfortunately for this particular class, we're focusing on this small niche in Western art, and it just doesn't involve people of color. And that was a really hard thing to hear, but it was the truth. It wasn't coming from a malicious place. I actually think it came from a place of love. And I think literally in that moment is when I decided, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna focus on people of color. So I used that moment to fuel my content, but I also used the experience to fuel my abilities to produce that content. I just curated my first show, which opened up at the Red Bull House of Art, and it was an all drawing show. It wasn't a specific theme about dealing with race or anything like that. All the artists in the show had their own particular themes. But whenever I'm invited to a show, I try to send multiple pieces there so that people who attend the show, they can get a snapshot into my particular practice or the way that I think about the world or my art or politics in that respect. People say a lot of interesting things about my work that is completely wrong, but I don't want to call out anybody. I just look at it and like, oh, I can see how you might think that's what this painting was about or this drawing, but that's not it. And as long as it's not a negative thing, I guess that's fine. I would just say more often than not, people are very optimistic and hopeful, and they see a lot of very positive, inspirational, happy things in my work, which was not necessarily my intent. I tend to go closer to the dark side more often than not. Black masquerade is essentially like people with these aesthetic practices where they're using uniforms of like white shirts, black pants, male and females, like very dressed up, trying to resemble civil rights activists from the 60s and the 50s. And they're using paper cutout masks to obscure their identity and adopt the identity of somewhat like a past archetype. So some of the main ones I've been working on recently, the past archetypes have been Nina Simone, Martin Luther King, and James Baldwin, and those were the three that really resonated with me initially. James Baldwin because, I've read a lot of his books and I really dig his philosophy on education and how being an intellect he was just as fierce, I think, as Martin Luther King or an activist who took it to the streets. But then Martin Luther King himself, just, I'm sure all of us as Americans can understand what he means to means to us in the grand scheme of American history and, the fight for civil rights. Nina Simone doing the same thing just through her artistry, some needing to negotiate her own demons and at the same time tackle these demons that were in the world. And the actual series is a direct response to the Black Lives Matter movement. And so this series sort of creates an alternative Black Power movement, if you could say, like all these people adopting these images and, I don't know, it's like cult mentality. Each particular work has essentially like people of color, Black people putting on a masquerade, and sometimes that can be a positive thing, sometimes it can be a negative thing, all at the same time. The Battle of Detroit happened at a time when I just had a lot going on in my life emotionally, and the city was going through a lot at the same time as well. I came up with this idea of juxtaposing, what if I mix Detroit with World War II Nazi-occupied Germany in some weird, crazy sci-fi world, but make none of that overt? And essentially the series kind of evolved into figures who are protecting themselves from toxic environments, and that's sort of what the mask kind of became a metaphor for. My work deals with some very serious issues, and the things that I'm thinking about aren't always happiness or joy or this unity and things like that. I'm trying to get people to think about themselves in the world and think about the importance of being an individual, the importance of looking at your idols and seeing what was it that they did that really inspired you, and also at the same time looking at your idols and seeing that they were not infallible, like like nobody was perfect. Nina Simone had her demons, Martin Luther King had his demons, James Baldwin had his demons, just about any activist you can think of. But that does not negate the great work that they did. But I find sometimes when people participate in idol worship, they don't think about that. My process of creating art definitely, I would say, involves a lot of thinking and conceiving of the image itself. Because I do figurative art and I would say like illusionistic sort of representation, it's labor intensive, so it takes a long time to do. But because something takes a long time, it takes a lot of planning. Once I decide what that image is gonna be, particularly for the series that I'm working on now, I do elaborate types of photo shoots to set up the composition. Once I come up with an image that I really, really like, it's time to paint. Oh, I love color. You look at my palette, it's organized in this very idiosyncratic way, but it's set up in a way so that it can give like a lot of punch or intensity to the chroma. Even though this current series, I've intentionally muted some of the colors so that the series can take on more of an ominous type of feel, but it still has punch to it. That's something I'm very proud of. Like, I like that when you walk into a gallery and like color punches you in the face. I'm looking at myself, I'm looking at my environment, my particular experiences. I'm looking at just the world that we're living in right now. We can see like all the racial tensions which are springing up via incidents with the police, via presidential candidates, via just social activists, period. And so this is my way to negotiate my feelings about all this that's going on in the world.
You can learn more about Tylonn Sawyer and every other artist featured here today on DetroitPerforms.org. Here we have the exhibit Cups behind me, which features 250 cups by 60 different artists. What? And they all have different shapes and unique colors. Our next artist is Carl Wilson, whose life story is almost as compelling as his art. Take a look.
I was in a cult for 30 years, and they controlled practically every facet of your life. What you wear, what you looked at for entertainment, what you read, everything in your life, even who you marry. So my time in the cult was really colored by being told what to do and told that I was insignificant. I decided that I'd had enough. and told them so, that I was leaving. And they told me I would never amount to anything if I did. And that's how I got out. I was very happy, and everything was going super well. And I had 4 really great years. Then in 2011, I got my cancer diagnosis. I went through my treatment and surgery, came out of surgery, and I could not hear. It took 2 years of trying different things, different hearing aids, the whole gamut, seeing doctors, and before I found a cochlear implant that worked for me. When I decided to become an artist, I was working on the assembly line for Ford Motor Company, Dearborn Stamping. And I had turned 50 and said, that's enough. I'm going to do what I wanted to do my whole life, and that's make art. The title of my book is Her Purse Smelled Like Juicy Fruit. This print captures what I wanted to say about Ma. It's purely speculative. She's on a train. She could be headed to Detroit. She could be headed to the bottom of things in New York, investigating murders and whatnot. I know so little about her. She sits alone, backlit by intense light that obscures the truth about her appearance and reality. But her purse always smelled like juicy fruit. I had little stories to tell in connection with each print. So you needed to have the story and the print. And then we thought, hey, well, maybe people could take the book, walk through the exhibition, see the full-size print, read a little different story, get a little more out of it. It got a lot of positive response. A lot of people identified with the stories, with relatives being presented. My 3 daughters would comb their mother's hair for hours. Mom would sit quietly while they did it. The title refers to a line in Bill Withers' song, Grandma's Hands. If I get to heaven, I will look for Grandma's hands. If my girls get to heaven, I suppose they will look for Grandma's hair. I tell the story of my mother's trip to New York City. Her sister was murdered, and she went there to get to the bottom of things. Mom was so secretive, I don't know how the trip turned out, but I was amazed that this little tiny woman went across the country to get to the bottom of it. Carving linoleum and making prints is not a complicated thing, really. You use a sheet of linoleum, and I like the softest stuff that I can get. You take a set of knives of varying width, and you start to carve out a drawing. You put a drawing on the list. Now, I work with a very minimal drawing because I like to feel this out as I go along. I am able to see in my mind black and white reversed there on the linoleum, and I just get a feel for what I want to do, getting the different textures to show up in the linoleum. And it's really just that simple. Carve it out. Once it's carved, you ink it, goes through the press, wheel it through, and there's your print. I realize now that I have to say something about what I see, what African Americans, what the underclass goes through here should be dealt with in my work. I think it's the job of artists to enlighten people, to trigger thought. We shouldn't just attempt to make something beautiful and make people feel good. We also need to irritate. We need to provoke change because obviously it's what's needed today.
All right, guys, I am here with the director, Matt Fry of the Detroit Artist Market. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing well.
All right, so tell us, what kind of artists perform here or show exhibits here?
Yeah, we have a wide range. The Artist Market has been around since 1932, so we're kind of the old kid on the block. But having said that, we have a really great range of artists, young artists. Our young artists are often exhibited right beside very experienced artists. That's kind of what we're known for.
Okay, and what kind of artists come in here? Well, Detroit artists only, right?
Detroit artists is our specialty, and some from around Michigan.
Okay.
And we have 6 exhibitions a year and a multitude of ways for artists to exhibit and sell in the gallery. We have our Elements Sales Gallery. We have a program called Art Placement, where we curate spaces and company lobbies and things like that. So a lot of opportunities for Detroit artists.
Okay, and when can people come and see the art?
Our main hours are Tuesday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. And like I said, we have 6 exhibitions a year. There's always going to be something new in the gallery when you come here. So please come and join us.
All right, and what kind of crowds do you want to get in here?
You know, diversity. Everybody throws that word around. We are a naturally diverse organization, so we get a really great cross-section of Detroit.
All right, well, thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate your time, Matt.
Thank you.
All right, now let's check out some upcoming events happening in and around the D. To discover more events in Greater Detroit, visit ixity.com. I'm at the Detroit Artist Market gift shop, where you can buy anything you want from Detroit artists, like this piece right here. I'd like to get that in my crib. Mandala art is born out of Buddhist traditions and features expression and patterns representing the universe. Now, Mandala art is taking on a new form by a Tampa Bay, Florida artist. Take a look.
It does take concentration. It does take a certain perfectionist personality type. Yes, it's a process. You have to really kind of push yourself through it. I started about 2 years ago. I was working with some candy boxes. So I started creating and people really started to respond, and that's how it started. The different kinds of mandalas I make, I've started with candies, right? And then I started incorporating different found objects because the candies are great. I love how bright they are. And then I just decided, well, let me see how they look with other types of objects. So I did architectural salvage objects. I did silk flowers. I've done keys, and then I do digital collage types of pieces. So all different kinds of things. The Tibetan Buddhist monks, they make mandalas out of sand, and it's like a prayer. So they are creating, and it's several days often that they take, and they are creating these little beautiful, intricate patterns with this sand. And then at the end, they blow it away to symbolize the impermanence of life, which is in the Buddhist tradition. So I have some galleries. I have one in New York. I actually have 2 in New York. One is in the Hamptons, and I have one in Boston right now, and then I'm working on some more, possibly in Miami. I'm going to go to the West Coast soon. It's a wonderful opportunity I had. I've always wanted to travel, so I took a job teaching abroad in Moscow several years ago, and then I ended up in Budapest. So living abroad, I got to travel a lot.
So I'm going to show you guys my process today so you can see a little bit about how I do it, and then I want to see how you guys make them. And remember, you can use any kind of material you want.
Vanity Fair Italy called me, or not called me, but they emailed me and asked if they could use one of my images and do a little feature on me, and I was so excited I couldn't even believe it. They had found me through an online art publication called Artsy, and they took an image and put it right into a page and called it Yum Art, and featured me in there. So yeah, it was wonderful. The difference is that I take the objects and I hand place every single one of them, and then I have a photographer come in and shoot it. With the digital ones, they are actually much more labor intensive. I didn't think they would be. So the digital ones involve a lot of different layers, like actually about 50 or 60 different layers of objects that I have to place by hand with my mouse. So it's a different process entirely. So as I work, I start from the center and go out. I'm thinking about color. I'm thinking about color relationships. I'm thinking about design. I'm thinking about variety. I'm thinking about textures. It's really the elements of art and principles of design come right into play there. Value, form, texture, color, all of these things that I used to teach, they play right into it. With these, I like to create that symmetry because it's a peaceful feeling when you have everything in this beautiful type of pattern where it's all, but there are some slight imperfections which make it more interesting. I am constantly searching for candy everywhere I go. I'm always on the lookout for new and interesting candies. Every single checkout line I go through, I keep my candy. I reuse it as much as possible until I can't reuse it anymore. But it does look different in every single mandala because it's constant. It's like a color. It's like my paint. It's my medium. So I'm always looking for different kinds of candy and finding it everywhere I go. I want people to feel inspired by my work. I want people to enjoy looking at art in a different way so that they're not intimidated by it in any way. I love to be light and love to be fun and use your intellect at the same time.
And that wraps it up for this edition of Detroit Performs. As always, for more arts and culture, head to DetroitPerforms.org, where you'll find featured videos, blogs, and information on upcoming arts events. Also, check us out on Facebook and Twitter. A big thank you to the Detroit Artist Market for having us tour this historic venue today. Until next Tuesday, get out there and show the world how Detroit performs, y'all. I'm DJ Oliver. Thanks for watching, guys.
Funding for Detroit Performs is provided by the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs and the National Endowment for the Arts, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.